Hello everybody, it's Craig the Natural Medic with another episode. On this week's episode I wanted to talk about some first aid precautions or first aid awareness that you can take. Last week I talked about my contents of my first aid kit, but this week I want to talk about one thing to be looking out for, especially this time of year. It's the peak of summer right now here in Texas. It's mid-July and it's hot. I want to talk to you about heat exhaustion and heat stroke. First off, I want to talk about prevention, then signs and symptoms and what you can do if you yourself or somebody in your party is having an episode of heat exhaustion or heat stroke. Without further ado, let's get started. The first method looking out for heat stroke or heat exhaustion is prevention. Watch the weather forecast very carefully. I talked about this somewhat in my hiking in the heat video I did a few weeks ago. You want to try to go out when it's not as hot. Go out in the early morning. Like right now when I'm recording, it's still warm, but it's not as hot as it's going to be 4 or 5 hours from now after lunchtime. That's when it gets really hot. Try to watch the weather forecast. Go when it's cooler. That will help a lot. The second thing you can do for prevention is to wear the proper clothing. You don't want to wear cotton. As they say in the outdoor space, cotton kills. The reason that is, cotton absorbs moisture, water, sweat. When it does that, it becomes heavy and doesn't become effective as for moisture wicking. You're going to continue to sweat, your garment's going to get heavier and heavier, and it's just not going to be very effective at trying to cool yourself down. You want to wear something synthetic. You may have seen in some of my other videos that I wear something that's made from synthetic materials. It wicks very easily. It's not very heavy, so it keeps my body cool. That goes quite a ways. That goes quite a ways for being more comfortable and trying to prevent getting too hot out there. The next thing you can do, of course, is keep yourself hydrated. You want to stay hydrated as much as you can in the outdoors. You want to drink before you get thirsty. Probably drink more than you usually drink. You want to try to make sure that you are replenishing your electrolytes. As you sweat, minerals and electrolytes in your body are being depleted.
Brondo's got what plants crave.
It's got electrolytes.
None tablets, something like that. The first step is prevention. Going when the weather is more favorable, wearing the right clothing, and keeping yourself hydrated. The next thing, we'll talk about signs and symptoms of heat stroke, heat exhaustion. Heat exhaustion is less severe, but heat exhaustion can become heat stroke and become more severe if it's left untreated. Your first signs of heat exhaustion is profuse sweating. So if you are sweating an incredibly enormous amount, sweating more than normal, you might be experiencing heat exhaustion, or if somebody else in your party is doing that, they might be experiencing heat exhaustion. And that's bad, because if it's untreated, it's going to possibly lead to heat stroke, which we'll get into a little bit later on. Now, another sign of heat exhaustion is you might start developing a headache. And the reason for that is because you're probably becoming dehydrated, and so your body is responding to that. And you may start getting pale. Of course, being sweaty, you're going to have pale, moist, clammy skin. What about heat stroke? Heat stroke can become a life-threatening emergency. If somebody is having heat exhaustion or heat stroke, you may need to get emergency services headed your way to help alleviate that. Luckily here in Texas, I've worked in EMS, and I've only had to respond to a few heat emergencies, and luckily everybody was okay after they got some assistance. Heat stroke, your body is going to stop sweating. You could develop a fever as the body is just so hot trying to cool itself down. It has actually run out of fluid to try to sweat and cool the body down. The body has stopped sweating. You could develop a fever, and your skin is going to be pretty dry actually, which is very unusual. If you're in a hot environment and you're not sweating, that's a bad sign. There may be some mental confusion starting to set in. The person may start getting confused, or yourself might start getting confused. What to do about that? The first thing obviously you can do is get that person out of that hot environment. Now if you're out away from air-conditioned buildings or a vehicle or something, you may not be able to do much more at that point than try to put them in the shade. Get them out of that hot environment. That might be the best thing you can do at the moment. The next thing is to try to get them to sip water. You want to have them sip water, not quickly, but they need to sip water. If it's not water, something that's going to replace electrolytes, something that's non-alcoholic and non-caffeinated. The next thing to do is try to, if they have any kind of heavy clothing on, that could be heavy sweat-soaked clothing, that could be just thicker clothing, try to get that off of them and try to get them stripped down to the bare minimum without exposing them unnecessarily so the body can cool itself off better. If you have those extra layers on there, the body may not be very effective at getting that extra heat off of itself. You want to apply cool compresses, wet towels or washcloths or rags, whatever you have. You may not have ice in the backcountry, but you want to apply cool wet cloths to the neck area, the wrists, the armpits, and the groin area to try to cool that body core temperature down. Again, if you're trying to treat them and doing all those steps I said, and emergency services are not on their way, you need to get them headed that way because that person may need some more serious help. That's an overview of heat stroke. It's not supposed to take place of any kind of formal training. If you need some formal training, I did talk to a friend of mine, Dr. Natalie Bonthius, back in December. I interviewed her on the channel here, and she has some great training that you can get online wilderness first aid course. I'll link it in the description below so you can check that out. Any questions you have about heat exhaustion, heat stroke, leave them in the comments below. Any other topics I might need to cover or you might want me to cover, I would love to see that below. Give me a thumbs up if you got value from this content. You can subscribe and hit the bell notification so you won't miss a video that I release in the future. I'll see you down the trail. Y'all be safe.